Hey, this is a podcast from Occupy Radio on Student Radio in Bergen. Please feel free to leave your feedback and comments on our Facebook page, Occupy Radio Norway.
This is Occupy Radio with Anthony
and Mr. Paulie.
Hello world! You're listening to Occupy Radio, based in the studios of Student Radio in Bergen, Norway. My name is Mr. Paulie, and it's a pleasure to introduce to you again for the second time on this show, Anthony Hill. Hi, Anthony.
G'day, Paulie. Nice to be here. And I'd like to start today with a quote from one of my favourite all-time people, Mr. Noam Chomsky. The general public doesn't know what's going on, and it doesn't even know that it doesn't know. And that's what Occupy Radio is all about, bringing people out of the dark and into enlightenment.
And we hope you're getting enlightened here. And previously on Occupy Radio, as in last week, we introduced Rune from the Occupy movement and Vegard from the Zeitgeist movement. And we found out that even though they were activists, Anthony, they weren't the stereotyped, lazy, no-good, unemployed, radical, pot-smoking hippies, but actually two fairly normal good blokes that realise that there's something going terribly wrong with the world and are trying to do something about it. So we've got a short background on the Occupy movement and the Zeitgeist movement and what they actually stand for and what they're trying to achieve. And if you ever want to review any of this lovely information from a previous show, you can always download our podcast. Actually, at SRIB, Student Radio, srib.no. You can listen to our podcast also on our Facebook page.
Yeah, we've got a Facebook page. We're growing, aren't we?
We are growing. I feel like we're going through the adolescent phase, or maybe prepubescent phase, who knows. But Occupy Radio Norway is what our Facebook page is called. And now, Anthony... But wait, there's more. Now we have our own YouTube channel called Occupy Radio Norway, with all our podcasts on it. So you've got no excuses not to listen to this stuff.
Absolutely.
And now we're going to go to our new segment.
And now it's time for Who Would Have Thunk It?
Who Would Have Thunk It is the unthunkable world news headlines that we have picked out.
And if you ever need any help with making jingles, just call us.
Don't ask Mr. Paulie. Anyway, unthunkable world news headlines. Some of these are from a few weeks ago, but we thought we'd chuck them in there. Basically, the short headlines this week, recent unthunkable world news headlines. A 14-year-old girl put in a maximum security prison in Pakistan for blasphemy. A punk band jailed in Russia for singing an anti-government song in a church. A pop singer sued for 60 million krona for supporting lesbians and homosexuals. A 16-year-old girl sentenced to be whipped in public for having sex with an older man. And diplomatic status of Ecuador's London embassy threatened because they protected a man who exposed the truth.
And our listeners probably know a lot about some of these stories already. But Anthony, go into this. What's the first one there?
Well, actually, I was just saying those headlines, but I've got an even worse one that I want to go into now.
Do that.
Two, actually. The NYPD, otherwise known as the New York Police Department, were just forced to release a report on a secret investigation aided by the CIA of Muslim communities over the city of New York over the last 6 years. So basically the NYPD, in conjunction with the CIA, have been spying on, eavesdropping and carrying out surveillance exercises of mosques and students. And after 6 years, Mr. Paulie, not one single lead or investigation was initiated.
Well, they probably saw a whole lot of very good people being quite pious, but eating good food and being very kind to each other.
Yes.
Is that a fair thing to say?
Probably, yeah.
Like
but
most people.
No investigations, no meat for them, you know. Anyway, so that was the first unthunkable news.
Anthony, if they were Hindus, there would definitely not be any meat.
No, they wouldn't.
No. But anyway, go on.
What would they be eating?
They'd be eating like chickpeas and things.
Thanks for that. The next unthunkable news of the week, the headline is, the US government agrees to clean up Agent Orange in Vietnam. I think we should have a round of applause there, boys.
Hooray!
Oh, but wait, stop your applause now. During the Vietnam War, the US government sprayed millions of gallons of toxic defoliant Agent Orange over jungle areas. They said they did it to destroy the enemy's hiding places in the jungle, not to harm the people. They also told their soldiers to spray millions of acres of food crops that they said were being used to feed the enemy, But the soldiers who sprayed the food crops later found out that more than 85% of the crops were for actually the civilians. This resulted in widespread famine, hundreds of thousands of people starving. Vietnam also says several million people have been affected by Agent Orange, including 150,000 children born with severe birth defects. The American government has never been taken to the European Court of Human Rights for crimes against humanity because they claim they only meant to kill the trees, not the people.
Well, they should be taken there anyway for killing the trees. A little trivia question based on that. What film was the quote, "I love the smell of napalm in the morning"?
Was that Platoon?
It wasn't Platoon.
The one before that?
Well, it was before that.
Apocalypse Now?
Apocalypse Now, indeed it was.
Should have got it the first time.
The quizmaster fails.
Anyway, back to this clean-up that the US government have agreed to do. On the surface, it looks lovely. But wait. It's 37 years later.
It's 37 years later.
37 years later. They've only agreed to clean up one contamination area, but dozens more areas are contaminated, including 2 airports. The Americans have given only minimal compensation to their own veteran soldiers who were affected by Agent Orange, and no compensation so far to any Vietnamese civilians, many of whom are suing the US government for the atrocities. Nagar Pham, who is a journalist with BBC's Vietnamese service, says Agent Orange is a very bitter legacy of the war, and many Vietnamese think the US should do more to help.
Anthony, can I ask a question? Do you think many people are... well, there's a certain scepticism about this, of course, including us. Do you think the real motivation behind these efforts is something to do with China asserting its dominance in
Well, I was just going to bring that up for discussion because China have been asserting their country in the South China Sea. They've been trying to make friends and also making a few enemies there as well, but the US can see this, so maybe the US is trying to win back some friends.
Maybe by doing that little clean-up. 37 years later. Well, never, yeah.
Yes. Anyway, so also on that issue, just as a side issue connected with the main issue, one of the biggest producers of Agent Orange was Dow Chemicals, and you know what? Dow Chemicals was one of the big sponsors of the recent London Olympics, along with McDonald's and Coca-Cola.
What a lovely combination. McDonald's, Coke, and a bit of chemicals on the side.
Yeah.
I'll have chemicals with my fries, please.
Yes. And also our old friend Monsanto, who, I'm afraid that people are going to hear a bit of sponsorship from Monsanto later on. But anyway, Monsanto gave us the weed killer Roundup and lied about its biodegradability for decades. It's now been successfully sued by environmental groups in France and the EU. And listeners will be hearing a little bit more or a lot more about Monsanto in coming shows.
What's this about the nuns taking on the Vatican?
Well, mate, you know what's happened there? In our previous show, we talked about the senior butler to the Pope, right? And he exposed a whole lot of stuff, and then he got arrested for doing that, just for exposing the truth. It was called the Vati Leaks. Right now, we've got the nuns who are turning against their beloved leaders. The Vatican is very pissed at the moment because there's a nuns organisation. It's the largest group in the USA of nuns, representing 80% of nuns in the USA, and they're writing their own statutes, meeting agendas, and liturgical text that deal with homosexuality and the domination of male priests. And this has come about as the result of the many scandals involving priests. The Vatican have ordered an investigation into the organisation and found serious doctrinal problems and ordered a leadership overhaul. But public opinion in the USA has rallied behind the nuns. And as the dispute with the Vatican unfolds, vigils have been held across the country in support of the nuns. So go nuns!
Yes. Yeah, I'm going to run with those nuns.
And actually, one more little thing that came out in the news connected with that, the former Archbishop of Milan died recently, and he was a very well-respected guy. His name was Cardinal Carlo Maria Martini, and he was interviewed before his death. And one of the quotes in the interview was, "The Catholic Church is about 200 years out of date."
You can often depend on dying people to give the truth because they've got nothing to lose.
Exactly, yeah. So, and he was actually a candidate to be the last pope, but obviously his views probably...
too radical. And Anthony?
Yes?
You mentioned cock before. What did you mean by that?
Well, in Norway, everybody likes to. I've noticed that people like to abbreviate things over here.
I thought you were going to say they like cock here.
No, well, they do that too, I think. But a lot of things are abbreviated. The names of newspapers are all abbreviated.
That's true.
The London Olympics is called OL.
Yeah, that's right.
And
EM is the European...
EM and VM, and yeah.
That's true. And also, one of my favourite bands here is also called Cock.
Yeah, who are they?
Kings of Convenience.
There we go. So people here are used to abbreviations, and we're going to be talking about COC today, and COC stands for Convergence of Crisis. And here in the studio today, we have our guests back from last week, looking very happy and fresh. Vegard and Runa, welcome back, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks. Hi, guys.
Now, convergence of crisis. According to the boys here, there's never been a time like this in human history where so many different crises are happening at the same time. And I'm going to put this to Runa because he's a man who doesn't normally shoot from the hip, Mr. Pauly. Could you elaborate on what you mean by such a bold statement?
I think we need to think of it in a sort of a picture or a story, and I'd like to use the story of the Titanic because it's a story that everyone knows.
You mean the ship, the Titanic?
Exactly, and it's a very good metaphor for understanding the current condition of the world. Like most catastrophes that involves human error, there isn't just a single cause. There are a number of different errors and systemic flaws that in combination decides the outcome. And the experience on board the ship are very different depending on where you are on board that ship. And this translates to how people in the world today are experiencing the current number of crises today. If you could understand what I was saying.
Yeah, Mr. Pauly, that was quite clever. You did that. A little bit impudent, I might say, but,
I'm sorry.
but clever. And you caught poor old Runa there by surprise, and he's half
Completely.
pissing himself laughing over there. But Titanic. So which one of you and me's Leo, and which one's Kate?
Well, I'd like to paint her in the nude, so I'll be Leo then.
But then I'm Kate.
That means I have to paint you.
This is going in the wrong direction. I think we should pull ourselves back to the topic at hand. Anyway, so if I understand you correctly, Runa, you're comparing the current situation in the world, or the world itself really, to the Titanic, and all of the separate crises affecting us is what's actually steering us towards the iceberg.
In a sense, yes. But apart from the fact that I think that we've already hit the iceberg, and that I think still think that the majority of the people on board can be saved. But perhaps the most important part of this analogy or metaphor is that everyone thought that the Titanic was unsinkable. And perhaps the listeners want to do their own studies and ask their friends if they believe that humankind will destroy the planet. Because I think many people are just going about it completely oblivious.
But then, of course, we are going to come and save the whole thing. So they'll just say, "Oh, it sorted itself out again, so
well,
no problem."
That's what we're here for, to save the world.
I guess so. I guess so.
Yeah, it's funny that I like that Titanic analogy because when they were building the Titanic, they cut corners, and many of the reasons why so many lives were lost were due to the cutting of corners and not doing things the right way and not using common sense.
Yeah, they didn't have enough lifeboats, for example, because why do we need lifeboats? It's unsinkable.
Yeah, exactly. And all of the other things. And in fact, some of these things will come up as we discuss this a bit further. Okay, all these crises, boys, where do we start? Why don't we start with the one that's going to do all the damage, Runa?
Well, for the Titanic, it was the iceberg. But for us, it's going to be the climate change, environmental disasters that follows. And the damages that have already been done to Mother Nature, we can't turn back on that now. So there's going to be a number of different issues like species extinction, ice caps melting, and extreme weather events that we have to deal with.
Yeah, I noticed on the news very recently a huge part of the Arctic just fell off.
Yeah, it happens.
Yeah, massive. So environmental catastrophe and climate change. Vegard, what is causing climate change?
Skeptics, they believe that since the emissions from fossil fuels are much lower than what nature itself is putting out there, global warming can't be caused by us. But the way I see it, it's about disrupting a natural balance, not about how much we emit compared to what's naturally cycled. I like to use analogy of a bathtub with the faucet on and the drain open. And then if you tune the faucet, you can stabilize the level in the tub below the edge. The CO2 from the use of fossil fuels is like adding water cup by cup into the tub from another source. And then, of course, if you keep on doing this long enough, the water will spill over.
That's a pretty good analogy there, Vegard.
Thanks.
Actually, I just want to point out that the cup is getting bigger every year.
Okay,
Yeah.
so what is actually causing it to accelerate, Vegard?
Well, climate change is accelerating because the energy we use, our energy use is growing exponentially, and most of the energy we use come from fossil fuels, and the energy use itself is increasing because more and more countries, developing countries, are introducing more and more consumers into the global market, and they consume, and all the consumption leads to growing emissions. I found a study that shows that there's a good correlation between GDP per capita and CO2 emissions per capita. And that study also says that, or claims that emissions per capita seems to be leveling out for the most developed countries. So we might hit a peak emission someday, but anyways, all these emissions are accumulating in the atmosphere and they are further disrupting the natural balance, and the tub is spilling over.
Can I just comment on that?
Yeah.
That emissions per capita is leveling out for the developed countries. I think we need to remember that a lot of the developed countries are exporting their production to
developed countries.
Yeah.
To developing countries, because the wages are lower. Like China is now the factory of the world.
So it only looks good. It's not.
Yeah, it looks good on paper.
Cheating.
So you can actually add on maybe a fair percentage from developing countries back onto the developed countries.
Exactly.
As well.
So, Runa, what is the situation right now? Would you say that you're subscribing to a slightly alarmist or survivalist point of view?
No, I'm not an alarmist or survivalist. I don't subscribe to those views. I read a lot of different views that come in that direction, but I prefer, when we're talking about this stuff, that we use the IPCC or the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, which is a panel which is set together by the United Nations of many different scientists. And their latest report from 2007, it's the fourth one, there is an unprecedented level of scientific consensus that states that yes, climate change is happening, and yes, it's caused by human activities. And according to this report, there's a global warming of about 0.8 degrees from pre-industrial age to 2005. But 1/3 of that has been since the 1980s. And I think we've entered the era of dangerous climate change at an alarming speed. So there's going to be a certain level of things happening that we don't have an overview over.
But 0.8 degrees doesn't really sound like much to the layman. Can you give us some kind of scale?
Yeah, I think first we need to say that scientists expect us to reach somewhere between 3 and 6 degrees at the end of this century.
3 degrees and 6 degrees.
Yeah,
Right.
Current projections
yeah.
are in that area, and at the current scenarios that we deal with today imply that at 2 degrees, extreme weather and nature events will get much worse. And at 3 degrees, human society will start to deteriorate because of that changing. And different living conditions will just get worse and worse. And at 4 degrees, large areas of the planet will become uninhabitable. Due to temperatures or flooding or different kind of inhospitable conditions. And at 5 degrees it gets much worse, and at 6 degrees we're looking at the extinction of most life forms on Earth.
See, it seems like there's the kind of tipping points happening here. Is that what really affects climate change the most?
Yeah, and this is the way that nature works, that you come to these tipping points, and when those tipping points occur, then there's no going back to the, you can't stop what's happening next. It starts a chain of events. So to give you an example of this, there's a recording of CO2 and acidity in salt water, which means that the oceans are being acidified, and the numbers don't sound like very much, but what we know is that the microbial life in the oceans are being affected. That some of them aren't being able to make their bodies properly. So what this means is that if the microbial life dies out, then the whole ocean ecosystems are going to fail because of this.
That's pretty bad news.
It's very bad.
Yeah, I just want to add, regarding the temperature increase, that people have to remember that 0.8, that's the current levels of warming, and that represents a massive amount of air that's being warmed up, and it's energy that previously was in the ground, and now it's being let out into the atmosphere, and it's a huge amount of energy, and that energy is driving the weather. So the weather is going to get more extreme.
Because, and even as I said before, that big chunk of the Arctic that fell off, there's been massive temperatures in the USA, unprecedented temperatures in the USA this summer, and fires and all kinds of things going on. And I've even noticed here in Bergen, the last 4 years, there really hasn't been any sun in the summer anymore.
Isn't
this
that
summer,
normal?
Very bad summers.
I've been here for quite a while, and some summers, most summers, you get a few weeks of sun. But there hasn't been more than a string of 3 or 4 days in a row, and not even that.
And another point is that the 0.8 degrees, it's a general temperature where you put all the different temperatures of the world together.
Average.
And you make an average. But it's going to affect different areas very much differently, and those parts of the world who are the poorest are going to be most affected first.
We all remember Hurricane Katrina in the Gulf of Mexico, of course, and the damage that caused. And then a new one, of course, came on exactly the same day, 7 years later.
Oh,
yeah. Mr. Pauly, oil companies, like Vegard mentioned earlier, that it's a lot of it has got to do with us, the increasing use of fossil fuels, right? And oil companies, I don't like to be pointing the finger, but it's hard not to. They have a vested interest in drilling more oil out of the ocean, and not only that, oil spills from oil rigs or from ships carrying oil are a major cause of environmental catastrophe. And you and I spoke about this last week, and we wanted to try and talk to somebody at the top, somewhere at the top. And would you believe it? I mean, listeners, you know this, Mr. Pauly, but maybe Runa and Vegard don't know. We managed to get a hold of the guy, the big, what do we call him, the big chief?
Yeah.
The CEO. What does CEO stand for again?
Chief Executive Orifice.
Orifice, yes.
Orifice.
And his name is Dud Bobley.
Dud Bobley, we managed to get an exclusive interview with him.
He was an unusual character.
He was a bit. Yeah.
This is Anthony and Mr. Pauly from Occupy Radio. Are we speaking to Dud Bobley, the Group Chief Executive of BP?
That is correct. That's a funny accent. Where are you guys from?
Yeah, we're from Australia.
Ah, the dingo ate my baby.
Right, yeah. Well, we're on student radio in Bergen, Norway.
Norway, huh? Isn't that the land of the midnight sun?
Yes, that's right.
You know, I think the midnight sun is one big scam.
Why is that?
Well, you know, me and my wife, we went on a business trip, if you know what I mean, and we didn't see a midnight sun.
Which month did you go?
December.
Ah. So, anyway, you're the boss of BP, right?
That's right. There's no one above me at BP. Hey, that rhymed. I'm a poet and How does that go again?
And you used to be in charge of the Gulf Coast Restoration Organisation after the big oil disaster in 2010.
I'm a poet, and I wasn't aware of it. Oh, I'm sorry. Would you mind repeating the question?
You used to be in charge of the Gulf Restoration Organisation after the big oil disaster in 2010.
What oil disaster?
That would be the one with the big explosion in the beginning
And it killed 9 oil workers.
and injured 17 others.
And it left a pipe gushing around about 55,000 barrels of oil a day into the Gulf of Mexico for about 3 months,
covering several square kilometres of ocean with an oil slick.
causing extensive damage to land animals, marine life and ecosystems.
Oh, that one. Oh, there's been so many.
So, Mr. Bobley,
No, please call me Dud.
okay, so Dud, can you tell us a bit about how that's going? We've heard that there still may be some oil escaping,
And that there are many people living along the coast that have lost their livelihoods.
and that dolphins, whales, and other sea creatures around the Gulf continue to this day to die at twice the normal rate.
And that they're finding now tons of oil on the ocean floor that's being dragged up accidentally by fishing trawlers.
And now you're clutching at straws. We're using absolutely every cent in our oil disaster fund to ensure that this will come out with BP looking squeaky clean. Now let me tell you about more important things, like our responsibility to our shareholders. Our second half report just came out showing a $3.7 billion profit. And I can see some fat dividends for all owners of BP stock, and hopefully for me as well, of course.
Now, Dud, what about the people on the Gulf Coast who have had their livelihoods destroyed?
There we go, clutching at straws again. Australia, huh? That's not a knife.
Well, we actually just wanted to talk about your commitment to being more environmentally responsible, Dud. Can you tell us anything else you've done recently?
Well, we've spent a lot of time and expense to make a lovely new logo with lots of green color and a nice big sun on it. Just like your so-called midnight sun, which I'd say proves that we're absolutely committed to being green. Australia, huh? Put another shrimp on the barbie.
I reckon that's about as far as we can go with this interview. Thanks.
Dud.
Yeah, so Dud, that was a bit of a dud, really, wasn't it?
Dud was a dud.
Yeah.
We were a little bit stiff there, listeners. Sorry about that. It was very hard to interview him.
Yeah, he kept avoiding us and the question and pretty much everything. Yes, after that rather useless interview with the head of BP, I think we'll get back to the situation at hand. It's a rather bleak picture you've painted there, guys. When you put it like that, it's rather doomsday-ish. Is it reversible?
Can I answer that?
Mm-hmm.
I'll answer that with a short no. It's not. We can't reverse the damage that has already been inflicted because the CO2 in the atmosphere, it's going to stay there. And it will be dealt with by Mother Nature in her own good time and ways. But the chain of events already in motion, we poorly understand that, or the scientists poorly understand that. Which means it's very unpredictable how fast things will occur and how things will play out.
Yeah, we seem to have like a fix-it attitude. Like, okay, if there's a problem, we'll fix it. But this is one which we cannot fix, really.
Yeah, but we still have a lot of options. It's just that people aren't really doing it. We can stop emissions. People have been talking about this for years. And we can prepare society for extreme weather events. We can build good housing and have like tsunami. So we know we can do all this stuff, like protect the food and water sources, negotiate distribution of resources, and I think we should take lessons from history, from
Louisiana, for example, from New Orleans, for example.
Yeah, but they were doing it wrong, obviously. But I think that we have to look back at the World War II, how quickly the different nations adapted to the need for more machinery of war. And in America, they passed laws which said you can't produce cars, you can't produce goods, you're going to produce weapons of destruction. And this happened in a few years, and they just retooled everything and put people into production, and it was snap, snap, snap. And in Russia, it was even worse. They had to actually move the factories and just stay ahead of the Germans, just rolling into the country.
But is that easier when you've got an enemy, for example? If you
Yeah,
know
it
that-
seems like that.
Yeah.
We have a pretty big enemy now.
Yeah,
Or
and
even
didn't-
it's ourselves, but
this
the
one is
threat
actually going to kill us completely.
Mm.
Just to wipe human civilization off the map of the galaxy. But the big difference now from then is that people back then, they believed that it was something they had to do. It was a necessity, and it needed to be done urgently. And this is what we're missing today.
You're on Student Radio here in Bergen. You're listening to Occupy Radio with Mr. Paulie and Anthony and the boys, Vegard and Rune, and we've been talking about the convergence of crises today on the radio and handling each individual crisis that is affecting the world at the moment. The first one we spoke about was environmental catastrophe and global warming. The next crisis, or we'll call crisis number 2, it's energy. And this is directly related to the crisis we've just spoken about, climate change, isn't it, Rune?
Yes, indeed. Climate change is a direct result from emissions from burning and processing of carbon-based resources like coal, oil, gas, and these oil and gas is not the number one energy source, but it also constitutes an integral and necessary part of modern life, and we can see it being used almost in every single product or service provided directly or indirectly.
But the fact that fossil fuels are used in so many things is probably something that our listeners are not so aware of.
No, usually we think of machinery like cars, airplanes, coal-fired power stations, like these ugly, big smoke coming out of things. But the widespread use of plastics, synthetics, chemical compounds is now absolutely everywhere, from wrapping to food. Like, did you wash this morning? What kind of container did your soap come in? Did you look at the contents of the soap?
Yeah.
Or
I use palm olive man. Makes me feel like a man.
Okay. So
there's oil in everything.
Yeah, your clothes and in your car and your pens and your cups and everywhere.
How is the oil in my clothes?
It's synthetic.
Polyester.
Synthetic fibers. Polyester.
Okay. So we can't. It's really hard to get away from using oil.
It's
because
not possible in modern life.
No.
So we are totally hooked.
Yeah, completely dependent upon it. In today's system, by the way.
So how do we get out of this, Vegard, this addiction?
Yeah, we have to go totally renewable and find alternatives for the fossil-based, plastics and all the other stuff. But if you investigate things, it's no question about whether this is possible or not, because when it comes to energy, during 1 hour at noon, the Earth receives enough energy from the sun to supply the entire world's needs for a year.
For a whole year?
Yeah, and now we're using it. Of course, fossil fuels is solar energy, but it's very old solar energy. But this fresh solar energy coming from the sun every day, it can be harvested directly, using solar cells or solar collectors, or indirectly through wind power and wave power. And then you also have tidal energy, which is, I guess, powered by the moon. And you have geothermal energy, which is fueled by heat from naturally decaying radioactive isotopes in the Earth's crust, and from the Earth's interior, which is heated by gravitational forces. So the problem today is missing incentives. It's just not profitable to go totally renewable.
The old profit motive, huh?
Yeah.
That's why we're not driving electric cars as much as
Yeah.
others. Yeah.
And the question, at least the question I've been asking myself is what the hell profitability has to do with anything if it's the future of mankind we're talking about. So, maybe in the end the only trace left to humanity will be a computer with a bank account containing gazillions of dollars.
But with all these other alternative sources, you've got geothermal, you've got solar, you've got wind, you've got tidal, there actually should be no energy crisis.
No, the crisis isn't about energy. It's about the incentive systems they aren't doing what we need them to do.
So what should there be? What is going wrong?
There's no political will to do what it takes. We can't afford it. And one of the problems is that politicians are being more or less blackmailed by owners of large corporations, because they say, if you don't give us tax breaks and don't make it nice for us to operate here, we'll take our business elsewhere, and taking the jobs and the tax money with us.
The thing is that they do threaten that, but so many jobs, I guess, in the USA and other countries, even Australia now, are being exported overseas anyway. The jobs in big corporations are being exported because they're cheaper.
Yep.
So even though they threaten with that, it's really nothing to threaten with.
But there are still jobs to outsource.
Yeah.
So in Norway, most of the big oil company here, Statoil, has started to look at using more companies in China, and so the jobs aren't safe here either.
China, the factory of the world.
Yep.
And we have to remember that crises are always good for GDP.
The next crisis, which many people will have heard about on the TV and radio and in the newspapers, is the food crisis. I've heard from certain sources that there are approximately 1 billion people on the planet who are starving or malnourished. Is this figure correct, Vegard?
Yes, at least if you ask the UN, they operate with a number of around 1 billion people.
United Nations. Where are the bulk of these people living?
Again, according to the UN, 98% of them live in developing countries. But there are also people going hungry in the West. And I found this organization called Feeding America, and they claim that 48.8 million Americans lived in food insecure households in 2010.
How many?
48.8 million. I think it's 1 in 7 or something.
In the richest
but that's
economy
they
in
live
the
in
world.
food insecure households, but it actually means they can't depend on getting their bellies filled every day.
I remember Live Aid in the 80s. And,
Me too.
apparently, they said it didn't snow in Africa this Christmas. And do they know it's Christmas at all? But the whole point, of course, was the Great Famine down there. Why is there so much poverty in countries in Africa and Asia?
That is a really long story. If we take all of that, then we're not going to have a program about the rest of the stuff. But to make it short, I think we need to remember that Western geopolitical interest let go of governance of these countries when they kept them as colonies, and they let go of that governance. But they kept control of the resources which were in those countries, and that was the main goal for the Western countries, like the British Empire.
So basically, the colonising countries went in, colonised, then let them go, but said, "Yeah, we're still going to get control of the resources."
Yeah, and America has sort of taken that position today. And what we see that they use to keep that control is a toolbox of different bad stuff, like war by proxy or embargoes, economic hitmen, splitting alliances, bribery, widespread use of debt. I think last week we talked about the IMF politics. So, just to be clear on this, that poverty is not an intended effect in itself, but it's a structural necessity. So, prices need to be lower somewhere, so you can sell it with profit somewhere else. So, you take out the resources from the poorer countries, and then you sell it in the rich countries.
That's what they do when they outsource. Western countries.
Basically, yes.
And so I've also seen or heard that many of these countries are forced to produce so much food for other countries that they don't have enough resources or land, I guess, to produce for themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's another side effect of this way of doing business is unequal distribution. Firstly, by lack of means to create a livelihood to actually pay for the food, and second, that conditions for growing food for yourself is taken away by policies that dictate that you should be growing cash crops for export so you can pay back on the debt.
But is it true, because I've heard this, that there actually is enough food and resources on the planet to feed everybody?
Yeah, completely. And if the proper measures were taken, then Africa could easily sustain all of the world's nutritional needs.
Not only their own, but the entire world.
Yeah. So we like to think about Africa with the pictures from the drought areas, but sub-Saharan Africa is very, very green. I've been there, so very green.
So who's actually getting all the food, and how do they manage to eat it all?
Well, basically we are, and we in the Western industrial world, we go to the supermarkets, or we go to a cafe or a restaurant somewhere, and you can pick and choose between completely everything what you can imagine, and many of the people that are above the poverty or starvation line, they have a severely limit to maybe one or two different main foods that they eat for their courses each day. So they're also restricted in the number of meals that they can eat every day.
They're pretty strong words. Who's eating this food? We are.
Yes,
It actually
but
does.
we are.
Yeah.
we
And
are.
we've thrown away a whole lot
Yeah,
as well.
But Runa, what about all this talk about genetically modified food? Isn't that a good solution?
That is a sore point in my conscience, that we actually have sort of allowed this to happen. I wasn't an actual part of this, but if I had known more about it earlier, I would have tried to fight it.
Mm-hmm.
Because the scientific studies about genetically modified food is that there isn't any significant increase in yield.
Mm-hmm.
The companies, however, they make a profit from patenting their seeds and selling pesticides that this modification has been made to, so the crop can withstand this pesticide. But the downside with this is that the private companies, they get to control the seed and the food production. The pesticides, they pollute the environment. The crops, they mix with wild species, so they degrade them. And also ultimately that the pests that they were intended to kill, the pesticides were intended to kill, they become resistant. So you need even deadlier pesticides.
Well, our show obviously needs funding, and so we have to go to a commercial break right now.
Hey there, my name is Bobby Bill,
And my name is Billy Bob.
and we're from the big friendly Monsanto Corporation.
You've heard of us. We invented DDT and Agent Orange to help the good old US of A win the Vietnam War.
Yeah, that's right, you got anything around the house that needs a killing, just give us a holler.
But hey, Billy Bob, we're here today to tell them about our latest and greatest product, Wind Up.
Wind up?
Yeah, Wind Up.
Wind up! That's right, wind up ain't no ordinary weed killer.
Yes, sirree, it gets right down in the soil and stays there forever.
And you know all those nasty little bugs that live down the soil?
Oh, yeah.
Well, wind up kills them too. And then those slimy old worms eat those nasty little bugs, and it kills them too.
But it don't stop there. No, sirree.
No, sirree.
Weasels and otters and wild boar and other small and medium-sized omnivores and amphibians.
Yeah, they're all dead and gone. Yep, Bobby Bill. We thought it right through here at Monsanto. It's killing everything in the food chain.
That's why we call it Wind Up.
Wind up!
Because it'll wind up in just about everything it touches.
And more. So you better make sure you don't eat anything floating around out there, because it'll wind up in you too.
Monsanto, we're a biological nightmare come true.
Tried and tested on Paul.
Yes, there's a word from our sponsors anyway,
What's
boys.
the last part that they said there?
I think he said tried and tested on poor people.
Yeah, it's just a disclaimer. I
Smart.
think they have they do have to put that
Yeah.
after all their
They're
commercials.
legally obliged to put a disclaimer in there.
We'll be hearing more about Monsanto in the coming weeks anyway, if anybody's interested to hear about what they're really up to. But we were talking about a food crisis, and Vegard, there actually should not be a food crisis according to yours and Runa's statistics.
No. The thing is, if our societal systems were designed to meet everybody's real needs, among them the need for nutrition, hunger would not be a problem, because, you know, we have the resources. Studies show that, and it's just a matter of fair distribution.
So basically, common sense, and the world would not starve.
That's easy put, but yeah, actually, yeah.
Yeah. I think I need to say something that there are two main myths opposing what we're saying, and that's overpopulation and that we are dependent on industrial monocultural culture farming. And there's a study from the University of Michigan, the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology, that has shown if we was growing the food locally in an organic manner without pesticides and minimal CO2 production, then we could actually feed 11 billion people.
There you have
11
it.
billion and say there's 7 billion.
That's enough.
This is Occupy Radio on SRIB, standing for Student Radio in Bergen. Remember, you can listen to our podcast here on srib.no or on our Facebook page, Occupy Radio Norway. And now, of course, we have our YouTube channel, Occupy Radio Norway. Anthony?
Yep.
We've been talking about the convergence of crises.
We have, yes, and we've been delving into each individual crisis. Just so the listeners know, we are actually being very broad and general, but we will be discussing each crisis in itself, in its own show in the future. So next week, the first show will be about climate change and environmental catastrophe, and following that, blah, 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 from there on. So now, the fourth crisis we have to discuss briefly today is economics, and it seems that everybody is constantly talking about debt. People are being thrown out of their homes, whole countries are being threatened with bankruptcy and being excluded from their unions. What's behind this?
Yeah, I guess I have to answer that one because this is my favorite subject. The funny thing about economics is that in today's society, people seldom talk of actually changing the economic structure itself. It's either regulate this or tax that.
It seems like the religion, really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The religious structure.
Yeah, and it seems like if you're not a politician or economist, you're not entitled to a valid opinion.
Yeah.
So that economics is a purely abstract construction, really, which affects all of us in all aspects of our lives. So it should be natural that we actually have an opinion about it. So my point here being that we have a system which is built on debt. Without the issuance of debt and credit, the system stops, and we know this from back in 2008 with the credit crunch. But this debt also creates an endless need for growth because of compound interest, and the debt itself will always exceed the current assets that you have available.
You always hear the politicians talking about, we need to grow the economy.
Exactly.
All the time.
Yeah. And this is because of the economic system itself. That you always need to balance it out. And the economists, they believe that inflation will balance the debt. So, but the truth here is that the real world, the real people, and the real resources are hurting really badly from this pressure of constant growth.
Yeah, I just wanted to make to give an easy, understandable example of how it actually is. If it was me and you in the world, Anthony, and I had 100 kroner, I loaned it to you and said I want 10% interest, then you have to pay me 110. But there is only 100 in existence.
In existence.
So then we have to create more.
Right.
That's
debt.
That's how it works. Yeah,
that's a very good example, Vega. That's 2 today now.
Thanks.
Man, you're on the ball.
And Continuing that, thank you.
Yeah.
That there's another problem with today's system, and that is the system is made for capital accumulation. The money system isn't designed for fair distribution. It's created for accumulation, so you can get a return on your investment.
But yeah,
and if we go back to the Titanic analogy.
Oh.
Thank you. I think we can compare it to like the White Star Line wanting to set a record time in reaching New York, and the captain of the ship obeying in spite of there being several warnings of icebergs in the area. More money and higher speed. That's the big.
But aren't all economies in the world based on this economic principle of capitalism now? And do we need to change to a different system? Is there another system?
Well, mostly people talk about it's capitalism versus socialism, and socialism is a bad word. And I think it's we need to go beyond that. We need to broaden our minds and realizing that we need to change the way that money behaves. And currently, it's only created through issuance of debt and the counter mechanic of inflation. And it's like the whole world is just believing that it's one tool. So
there's only one tool in existence, and that's money.
And it's like you only use a hammer for every kind of building task that you want to do.
So what you're saying is that money needs to be what it was intended for, simply being a medium of exchange for goods and services, not for accumulation.
Exactly, and the world needs currency systems that behave differently and appropriately to match supply and demand without the need for compound interest or capital accumulation. And we just need to get our heads around that money is a tool that can be shaped differently according to the situation.
But Runa, if we get a whole new currency system, what about the rich people? I mean, they need their mansions, they need their summer cottages, they need their winter cottages, they need their Porsches, their Ferraris, they need their boats.
Gold toilet seats.
Yeah, they're going to whine a lot.
No, they're going to need this stuff. They do.
They'll be shitting themselves if the system changes.
Yeah, and they'll be really angry about everything. But just to clarify, the old system only has one type of currency, and if you call it a dollar or yen or euro or whatever, its system of functioning is still the same. And a new system should have currencies adapted to many scenarios, and the functions varying will be different. And the best way of getting this into existence and making it work is probably to have the new and the old run parallel, and let the smart rich people figure out for themselves how to best migrate their assets. And I think we can think of users and makers of encyclopedia, how Wikipedia in a very short amount of time just completely threw the old models out the window.
Yeah, nobody uses an encyclopedia at home anymore. Everybody's on Wikipedia.
Completely.
So they tried for a while to make it online, and that didn't work.
So is this you representing the Zeitgeist movement, Vegard? Is this pretty much what they're talking about in the
in the long run, we are talking about moving out of a money system completely, so that we outgrow the need for money altogether. But to get there, we need to have some kind of transition, and that transition could well be a system with parallel currencies with more specific uses and fields. For instance, you can have one specific currency from food. So that food production or food distribution isn't affected by other crises.
This is the fifth crisis of the day.
And it's war.
And it does actually go quite nicely into war, because war is often fought over
all of the other things that we've been talking about. It's because ever since I was young, a little kid, I can never remember a time when there wasn't one or several wars going on, or one about to happen. Why is that? So who wants to answer that question?
I can answer that question. You know, they always talk about security and control, but to me it seems that it often means different things for ordinary people and people in governments. And to bridge the gap, they use fear and propaganda to get people behind the governments. And you can see from both the first and the second Iraq war, They said that yes, Saddam and his weapons of mass destruction is a great threat to your security, and they used it as a reason for invading. But now we know that he had no WMDs, and the Bush administration probably knew that when they invaded. So the biggest motive was probably to secure US's access to Iraqi oil. And this is nothing new. In the 50s, in Iran, you had a democratically elected president called Mohammad Mossadegh. And he figured that he was going to nationalize the Iranian oil industry. Because up until then, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, or BP, as they are called today, they were in control. And then suddenly in 1953, Mossadegh was removed through a coup. And the coup was requested by the British MI6 and carried out by the CIA. They called it Operation Ajax. And this is something you can read about in Wikipedia. It's documented stuff, nothing conspiracy theory related or anything like that. And of course you have the latest example, or one of the later examples is Libya. And there I said they were going to bring them democracy. But I suspect that the real reason was securing access to Libyan oil. And it seems that it's always more important to bring democracy to the oil-rich countries for some reason.
So what you're saying is that all wars are fought on the basis of trying to control resources?
It looks like it. Of course, some wars can seem more complex on the surface, but you know, it's about securing. It's conflicts of interest over something.
What do you think, Runa?
Well, I think that you mentioned to bridge the gap that they use fear and propaganda. It's a very good point that there is a big element of crowd control in this, that you can exploit this for political reasons to be re-elected. I think many people actually believe that Bush was re-elected for his second term in office from the fact that he was waging wars.
It's our old friend Noam Chomsky wrote about it in Manufactured Consent, where the governments use certain things happening in the world to get the population to agree with what they're doing.
Yeah.
Falklands
War,
for example.
Very good example.
So what you're saying is that governments have always dealt with impending crises by waging war, but the current convergence of crises is one that cannot.
Yeah, and the sad thing about this whole mess is that many of the people in office and many of the analysts and specialists who have been hired to look at, say, for instance, climate crises and different weather conditions, they have a military background. So they're looking at this stuff and saying, oh, there's going to be a lot of social distress, so we need to bring in more guns. But the sad thing is you can't stop species extinctions with guns.
So, listeners, if you've just tuned in, hopefully you tuned in a lot earlier than this, but we've been talking about the convergence of crises and how they're affecting the world right now, several. And we went a little bit into our 5 crises. We will be going deeper into those 5 crises in the coming shows. But to wrap up, I just want to get this straight with you, boys. Our 2 experts in the studio. We have an environmental crisis caused by human activity here on Earth. It's in the form of approximately 1 degree rise in global temperatures, which may not seem like much, but has already caused significant changes in our delicate ecosystem and the increasing extinction of many species in the food chain, of which we are at the top. If it gets to a 6 degree rise in temperature, we can all say goodbye. Is that right, pretty much?
More or less, yeah.
Yeah, more or less, yeah.
This environmental crisis
Apart from the fact that we're experts. I wouldn't call myself an expert. I've just been reading a lot about this. Yes, happy amateurs, but we're really dedicated to this stuff.
Yeah, you have been reading up on it a lot, and you are far more experts than Paulie and I.
Yeah, but what is clear is that one thing influences another. You know,
it is. As I was going to say, the environmental crisis is perpetuated by our addiction to fossil fuels, and we don't actually need the fossil fuels to power the Earth as it exists today, because there's so many other clean and cheaper forms of energy. We have 1 billion people starving on the planet, but there's easily enough resources to feed a much larger world population than we have today, with more intelligent management and priorities. We have an economic crisis. This is just going on. It's caused by debt, compound interest and our addiction to the accumulation of money rather than using it for what it was originally intended for, a medium of exchange. We have constant war and the threat of more wars always hanging over our heads. And, you know, Mr. Pauly, I wouldn't say I'm the most smartest guy on the planet, but, you know, I can see that we could easily fix the fixable energy crisis, the food crisis and the economics crisis. And if we did that, then the environmental and war crises would end up fixing themselves over time.
Thing is, if we can do it, imagine what smart people could do.
Yeah, I think
that's what we're hoping.
It's that these different crises, they need to be dealt with and not separately. They need to be thought about in a
relation to each other.
Integral way. So that
isn't that called holistic thinking?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And
Nice
it's that's a modern kind of way of thinking about things, which is coming more and more.
Yep. And
Thankfully.
very well summarized, Anthony.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's very
Holistic is spelt with an H, not with a WH, by the way. Just for you out there. Now, we have a segment.
And it's called...
Wait, we've got to make a spontaneous
jingle,
all right?
Science breakthrough of the week. Was that your science fiction noises?
Yeah. Wonder how that's going to come across on here.
Anyway, science breakthrough of the week. And just before I go into this, I hope I didn't depress everybody with that little. I'm not talking about the people here in the studio that wrap up before, because we're going to go further into those issues and see how they can be resolved and how you guys out there in radio land or in the world can help us resolve these issues. And this, what I'm about to talk about now, is one of those things: bladeless wind turbines that will not harm birds, because wind energy is getting bigger and bigger. Norway are planning a wind farm, I've heard now, and Denmark lead the world with wind farms. If you ever fly from Norway down to the top of Europe, you see all the wind farms on the way in the North Sea.
Especially in Holland as well.
Yeah, and it is becoming an increasing source of energy. However, it does hurt the birds and bats. And also, I've heard that humans get, if you live close to one, that people have been getting sick from there's some kind of low-frequency noise that comes from these, from the turbines, And so this World War II veteran, Raymond Green, he's 89 years old, if he's a day. He's a resident of Jackson, California, and he's created a working prototype of a bladeless wind turbine, which is bird and bat friendly and very quiet in operation. It's still in the development phase, but Mr. Green intends his design to be produced in various sizes, from smaller personal versions you can have in your backyard to much larger turbines which could be implemented in wind farms. Mr. Green explains that unlike traditional three-blade turbines which can kill birds and bats as they rotate at high speed, his prototype has no external moving parts, but it houses them all. All of the blades are housed within the unit. So what do you reckon, boys? Does that sound good or what?
I think we've got a goer. I'd like a small one for my bedroom, if that's all right.
There's enough wind in your bedroom already, Paulie, I've heard.
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah,
this is the kind of invention that we need. All the different parts of renewable technology, they need new additions to the invention, so you can actually use them at home and you can get them for cheap and they're environmentally safe. And I think one of the biggest missing pieces of this puzzle is actually battery technology that we need to be able to store the energy which is created.
Because so much can be wasted.
Yeah, but the distributed production of energy is very welcome. I think getting away from the big central farms and the big energy companies that are sort of just running the business.
Yeah. So Paulie wanted to say something.
Yeah,
he put his hand up.
No, because at the beginning, I was just very curious. At the beginning of the show, you mentioned poo.
And you said, and I said we were going to finish with poo.
Yeah, and we're getting towards the end of our show, sadly enough.
We are, and I think the listeners have been waiting for this part too.
They've been going, oh God, can't wait to the poo part. But those of you on podcast, you can just fast forward to it. That's kind of good. But if you're listening live today,
here comes the poo.
Here comes the poo part.
Well, we've just been talking about energy again, and you guys can decide if this is green energy or brown energy. A little funny put in then by me. From poo and back to you. Another little funny there from Anthony. It has been known for decades that microorganisms can be used to create electricity, but it's only been recently found that more effort has been put into its true potential. And we all know that poo contains lots of microbes. So new technology will potentially increase the performance of the microbial fuel cells by up to a whopping 50 times the current amount.
Whopping?
Whopping, yes.
Do you think that's why people say he dropped a whopper?
That could be, knowing this is going to happen in the future.
Maybe the Burger King burger is named after that as well.
Well, it could become that kind of whopper in the end. So sewage treatment stations in the future should be not only be able to power themselves, but feed electricity back into the main grid. But I'm thinking about, boys, what about will citizens be able to benefit from this themselves with maybe poo credits or poo points?
Poo points.
Maybe households will be able to install fuel cells to avoid the rising cost of electricity. And so more poo will mean more energy and more money for the household. So you can poo your way to richness.
Yeah, but there are already people having tanks and collect methane gas from their own poo and using it to power things in their houses. So people are already using their poo for similar stuff.
So there we go.
Some people are already so full of shit anyway.
Poo could save the world.
Just the thought of poo saving the world. It gets a bit of a bad rap, doesn't it? Poo?
It does, yeah. Do you have a poo song to play?
I didn't bring along a poo song, actually, but I could sing, like, Mr. Hanky, the Christmas poo.
So on that note of poo, Mr. Paulie, I think it's time to say goodbye.
You can't really go much better than poo. I don't think it doesn't get better. But I'd like to thank you, Anthony, of course.
And I'd like to thank you for your incredible choice of music today. I've enjoyed each and every song.
Well, thank you, Anthony. This is a mutual admiration society. But we hope you like it out there in Radioland. And Vegard, thank you very much for coming in today from the Zeitgeist movement.
It's been a pleasure.
And, of course, Rune from the Occupy movement. You're stars, guys. And we look forward to hearing from you next week on Occupy Radio.